Good Tuesday morning, everyone. Welcome to the Volquest.com podcast presented by our good friends at Exterior Home Solutions. Don't forget, if you're in need of a roof repair, if you're in need of vinyl repair, they do all kinds of things at Exterior Home Solutions. And this time of the year, you got all the summer storms going on, all those things. You need to be mindful, shingles blowing off, and all those types of things. Exterior Home Solutions can come out, give you an inspection, and give you a free estimate. They can take care of all that. So if you're in East Tennessee and you're in need of some kind of repair or a project from garages to decks, check them out at Exterior Home Solutions. They're online at exteriorhomesolutions.com, or you can give them a call at 865 524 5888. That's 865 524 5888. I'm Brent Hubbs along with Austin Price, Rob Lewis, Grant Ramey. Glad to have you along with us. Eric Kane is off and about for the next few days, so you're stuck with me. But welcome to the Tuesday podcast, guys. Lots to get to. Be sure and hit that like button. Give us a thumbs up. We want to get this thing to 500 likes. Continue to subscribe to the Volquest YouTube channel, and obviously subscribe to Volquest.com. Plenty of things going on right now. We got baseball to get into. We got some basketball to get into. We have some football, as always, to get into. Guys, I want to start with this question, and it kind of ties into a little bit of baseball and football. Right now, Tennessee is a pretty heavy buy by a lot of national people. There's a real assumption that from a lot of people that Tennessee is just the train is rolling and is going to continue to roll. And there's a lot of love for Tennessee on a lot of different fronts. As a Tennessee fan, should fans be a little bit more cautious about this fall based on what's going on with baseball this year? And I'll phrase it this way. Not that baseball's bad, right? They're in the postseason. They're going to do well. They still have a chance to do very well and make a run. But, Austin, this was a baseball team that was ranked high. Tony Vitello said in the preseason too high, but they brought all their pitchers back. And there was a real assumption that this baseball team would keep rolling really fast, okay? It hasn't gone that way. Are people assuming too much with the Tennessee baseball team, particularly in light of what we're seeing out of baseball this spring?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's very real. I think you have to go into it cautiously optimistic, right? I mean, at the end of the day, you know, there are some parallels that maybe you could, put between the two sports. With Tennessee baseball returning some key spots, much like football does. But there are some big holes, and no one's going to know what, John Campbell can do. No one's going to know what some of these key spots are going to kind of how they're going to unfold this fall until we get out there and see some live action. You go back to that Pittsburgh game a year ago, Hubs. Who would have thought the team that barely won at Pittsburgh against the third string QB in the second half was going to beat Alabama a month later? So much can change over the course of just a few weeks, much less a few months. So I think, again, cautiously optimistic is the way to go into it, thinking just because there is some promise. And I think that the real improvement will be on the defensive side of the ball, especially if they can kind of figure out what they're doing in the secondary. Because I think front seven wise, they'll be really, really good.
All right, let me ask you this way, Grant. I mean, should you just remember that each year is really different? Because I think that's what we're learning from baseball, right? Like last year's team is just very different from this year's team. Style of play, all those things. Is that the lesson here? Is that it's hard to equate one year to the next year in any sport?
Yeah, and I think there's a lesson that sometimes you just have really special seasons. Really special seasons. I mean, you're not going to win 50 games, 57 games, whatever it was that baseball won last year. Just every single. That's not sustainable. You can have a good year. Tennessee's had a good year. It's just really hard to live up to that kind of standard. I mean, Tennessee's still, based on my limited knowledge of the baseball season, in contention to host an NCAA regional weekend, which is really all you could hope for in any baseball season. You want to be in the postseason, and you want to be one of those national seeds that is hosting. I think it's the same thing with football. Like I mentioned it last week or 2 weeks ago, whenever that was. There's a lot of magic last season. That's not that Tennessee didn't earn 11 wins and beat Florida and beat Alabama, and deservingly so. But there's a lot of stuff that happened. It just made it feel like a very magical season, and one that's very hard to duplicate. And Tennessee, it's not like anything but 10 wins moving forward a season is a failure. It's going to be impossible to sustain that right now based on where Tennessee is. Tennessee can win 8 games next season, 9 games next season, something like that, and still have a really good season still take steps forward to building the program into what you want it to be. It's going to be really hard to sustain at the rate they had in 2022 because, like I said, it just felt magical and a lot of right place, right time, right guys in the right positions, stuff like that. So they can still have great seasons, like baseball still having a good season. It's just not going to be hard. It's going to be hard to be what they were a year ago.
Rob, is assumption not a bad thing? Is that a good thing that fans are assuming things based on what Josh Heupel has done in 2 years? Is that more of a credit than it is any kind of like, hey, don't get your hopes up? I mean, you should be getting your hopes up if you're a Tennessee fan.
Yeah, but I mean, it's a good thing in terms of season ticket sales. In terms of Danny White having a receptive market out there to peddle season tickets, which sold first. I mean, what's the number, Hubbard? 70-ish.
Yeah, 70-ish. We'll call it 70-ish.
That's huge for a program that, I mean, what are we 4 years, 5 years away from seeing them go 0-8 in SEC play? So I mean, I think it's dangerous for people to assume they're going to win 10 games, but no, I mean, I think the sense of excitement and just enthusiasm for a program that, golly, man, it was an albatross around this fan base's neck for so many years. So I mean, I think it's a good thing, but I mean, we've talked a lot about it. I wouldn't just take it for granted. I mean, you've got to still fill some big shoes for some guys that played out of their minds last year.
Here's how I look at it, Hubbard. If the head coach and the players believe, and then you're a fan, why don't you believe too? So, like, and that's kind of where I'm at with it. I mean, cautiously optimistic, again, is how I would say it. But at the same time, if the head coach, and I firmly believe the head coach has a lot of belief in himself, his staff, and his players, and the players are believing, why not have the same type of belief?
So you're saying stop throwing wet blankets and enjoy the summer. Enjoy a summer. I mean, I'm not being I'm not being a smart aleck. Okay, I'm not.
No, I get it. I mean, I think there's too much unknown, Hubbard, to sit around and worry all summer. Let it play out. See what they look like at the end of September. Sorry, if they beat Virginia like everybody expects, win at Florida, which never happens, but everybody expects, and you roll into the month of October, sitting there undefeated, then everything can kind of adjust. Let that first month play out. Because, again, the group that played at Pitt, nobody, and I mean nobody, saw them beating Alabama a month later. And if you say that you did, then you're lying. Because, I mean, like, there was nobody, when they were struggling to hang on against a third-string QB, thought that team was going to, allow less than 30 points in, 10 of their 13 games, was going to, have the season and the magical run and the wins at LSU, not just wins. I mean, the beatdown on the Bayou and the win over Alabama and the beatdown of Kentucky at home. And I get that Kentucky is an old, punching bag for Tennessee, but Kentucky's still a much better program on the whole the last 7-8 years than it has been before. So, and have beaten quality teams over that 7-8 year span. So, I just think don't worry about what you don't know. Let's let it play out the month of September.
And embrace the fact that you're in a conversation in the summertime, Grant, that you just haven't been in, for several years. Nobody's predicting Tennessee to go to the playoff. Okay, I'm not saying that, but I mean, there's a lot of talk about that Tennessee has arrived, and that there's not going to be this drop off here. Embrace that if you're a Tennessee fan, because you haven't had that fun in a long time.
Right. Embrace it. I think what Austin said, enjoy it. Just enjoy having these conversations and enjoy kind of where the program is right now compared to where it's been in recent history. And, there's a ton of continuity on the coaching staff. There's a ton of, the culture they've built since the second they've basically got here. The way that Heupel seems to be an extreme players coach. I mean, how many guys have left through the portal in the last whatever it's been? It's not very many compared to what other programs take, I think. So just the continuity roster-wise, the continuity coaching staff-wise, the excitement around the program, regardless of what the win total is next year and what it looks like. Until then, you can worry about that when it happens. But just enjoy being, I think in Vegas, they're like the 12th best national title odds. Just to be in that kind of neighborhood conversation, whatever. It's been so long since that's been the case. I mean, just not only the wins, but just the continuity and the coaching staff and not having to worry about the stuff this program's had to worry about the last few years, to enjoy that just where the program is.
I think it's a perfect spot. There's enough buzz that people are talking, but there's still enough doubt out there that Heupel can use it as motivation for his team this summer. Action Sports Network, they put out their New Year's Six projections. Tennessee's not in it. And I get it. Tennessee's not earned the right to just be automatically assumed that they're going to be in it. But little things like that, I think that Hype can use to, as motivation. We all love Jesse. If Jesse's come out with his list of top running backs rooms, top linebacker rooms, Tennessee's rarely mentioned in any of that. All those things are things that coaches can use. And so you'd expect them to try to use that for those groups, use the somewhat of a disrespect when they're not mentioned in certain things, but there's still enough buzz out there about Tennessee, they're over under for win total and all that still relatively high that, it keeps the momentum and buzz around your program.
Or you could just be Kirby Smart and just make up all kinds of stuff that your team's going to go like 4-7 or 4-8 or whatever.
Nobody believed in us being back-to-back national champions with 37 NFL draft picks.
It's like when Boss Hog and Roscoe hypnotized Luke Duke that he needed to sell to General Lee. That's why Kirby is down there.
It's pretty remarkable what they pulled off for sure. Nice reference, by the way.
No one believes you. No one believes in you.
All right. Speaking of believing in somebody, here's the next topic I want to throw at you on this Tuesday morning, because it's the middle of May, and we'll get into some recruiting stuff, and we'll get into some news stuff here in just a couple of minutes. But I'm going to throw this one at you, Rob Lewis. You're a stock market maven. You're a guy. You're buying, selling. You're working the stocks all the time from your couch, I know. So my question to you guys is this: who are you buying stock in this summer? Okay. Now you can go two ways with this, right? You can buy in a starter and you're not going to make any money off of it, right? So there's no risk in that deal. You're buying Apple at a high rate and it's going to basically yield you no profit. Or you can take this topic and you can go and you can buy a startup young, and take and try to hit on something. So that's my question to you. We're going to start on the offensive side of the ball. I don't care who goes first. Who are you buying stock in as the summer rolls in for Tennessee?
I'm buying stock in Dante Thornton.
Okay.
I get it. Everybody's going to have projections.
That's a mid-level stock. That's not a startup.
I'll tell you who else I'm going to buy stock in. McAllen Castles.
Okay.
I think he's going to be kind of laying in the weeds, but quietly super productive.
All right.
Austin, I had two names pop in my mind: Dante Thornton and McAllen Castles. So number one, get out of my head. Number two, I'll take Squirrel White just to oppose your Dante Thornton. And I'll take – how many are we taking? Are we taking two?
You can take one or you can take two. It doesn't matter. We're going offensive side of the ball first.
Cam Selden, just because it feels like that's a good value play. I don't know. But I don't want to take Rob's options either.
Thornton and Selden would have been two that would have sprung to my mind for sure.
Throw Nico, Rob, just to get them all worked into a frenzy pitch.
And I don't think Thornton is really that much of a dark horse. I don't know how much you're really going to see a freshman play. Man, I thought the way they use tight ends and the way Ethan Davis looked in the spring, if he bounces back from the collarbone and is healthy in August, I think he might be a guy with a chance. And yeah, Sewell and Thornton are two guys to me that I think are just next level athletes. I mean, how quick will it happen for Sewell?
You mean Selden?
Selden, excuse me, is a first year guy. And but man, Thornton you talk about looking the part.
All right, so where do we put Jalen Wright's stock? Okay, where's his stock value? I mean, he was the leading rusher on this team, but yet, he's kind of an untalked about guy a little bit because, he was more talked about for fumbles last year, AP. Fair or not fair. He did fumble a little bit early, but he cleaned that up. But really, he was a kind of a low-key, not really talked about, end up being the leading rusher on this team. Did you feel like he just had it was like a quiet year for him? Maybe the whole running back group in general, it was just quiet because it was all about Hendon and it was all about Jalen Hyatt. Maybe the stock of the whole running back group was down. Maybe that's why Jesse doesn't have him listed, right?
I would go. No, Jesse's a ball hater, don't you know that? love you, Jesse. I would go more along the lines of it's a kind of that junior year for Darnell Wright. Darnell doesn't talk. Jalen doesn't talk. So thus, he doesn't get talked about because he's never out in front of the cameras. He just kind of goes about his work. He's very methodical and all that. And I know they play two different positions, but I think that their demeanor and how they go about things is very similar. So I would kind of compare it to Darnell's junior year, and I would buy stock in Jalen Wright. He's had the right approach. He is a physical enough back, and I think could showcase some things. But I'd also buy stock in Dylan Sampson.
Yeah.
Hey,
And
Hubbard,
go ahead.
Hubbard, who would you pick, and how interesting is it that so far Joe Milton's name has not been mentioned?
Well, that is fascinating with Joe Milton because where do you? I mean, is he his stock could go through the roof, right, and make you a ton of money. Or
I think he's one of those unknowns I was talking about.
Yeah, could be a little bit. If I was buying in just a startup unknown type deal, I'm buying Ethan Davis stock right now. That guy surprised me more than anybody did in spring practice. Now I know he got hurt and that's a setback, but I did not think at all. I mean, Austin was talking earlier about leaving Pittsburgh thinking that team was going to be Alabama. I did not think at all in January that Ethan Davis was going to be physical enough to be able to play right away. And I mean, he's big. He's an added weight, muscle. I'm really intrigued to see what Ethan Davis can do for this team if he can stay healthy. The other one would probably be Dylan Sampson, because I think Dylan Sampson is become a much more complete back based on what we saw in the spring. He's added some weight, and I think that's the interesting one out of that running back room for me is where does Jabari Small fit when it's all said and done coming off the injury. I think that one's going to be somewhat intriguing to see. I'm not saying he doesn't play, but what are those rep snaps? What does that look like with him? But Rob, you bring up a great point. I mean, where would you put Joe Milton? There's an assumption by so many people that Joe, we've had this discussion with Joe for a while, but where is he on the stock buy? Is he a guy that, yeah, he's going to shoot through the roof this fall, or is everybody still a little bit of, I got to wait and see that one a little bit more, and you're not buying as much in that Orange Bowl win as maybe some people are nationally? I don't know. Going to be interesting to see. All right, defensively, let's hit the defensive side right quick. Who are you buying stock in? Go ahead, Rob. We'll let you go first.
I think it's easy to pick one of the young kids on the edge. I mean, Joseph's. I would buy stock in Joshua Josephs, in Pierce, and even I think Caleb Harry could have a role similar to what Joseph had last year.
Go ahead,
Grant Ramey, who you buying?
No, go ahead, AP. I'm gonna see if AP's still inside my head.
I want to buy stock in Keenan Peely, and I'm also going to buy stock in the secondary. It's a flyer stock. We'll see where it goes, but I'm going to buy stock in Kamal Hadden, because I think a lot of people thought, even people in that building over there, thought Kamal Hadden would not be here. And then Kamal Hadden kind of put his head down this spring and just went and worked and, has done all the right things since the season ended. And is that just because he knew, like, there was a possibility he may not be asked to be back, because he's not been that same chirpy person that we saw against South Carolina when you're down 25 and you're, still talking when you give up a completion for 12 yards. I mean, he's been somewhat better. Now, again, does that mean he's perfect? I wouldn't say that, but he certainly seems like he's turned the corner and had a good spring. So I'm going to take a flyer stock with Kamal Hadden.
How high is Danico Slaughter's stock? Is that a value play at all? Can I call that a value play?
I think anybody in the secondary is a value play because nobody expects much.
I think I'll take him just because I can't ever get that Kentucky game out of my head, and it feels like the potential there for him is so high, and the ceiling there is so high, and what he can be, and the opportunity that AP's talking about in the secondary that's going to exist for somebody to step up and be the man. I think that would be the first name that comes to mind. I don't know if I have a second one, but no, AP was not in my head that time. I did not have Keenan Peely jump out first.
with Kamal Hadden, AP, is this the famed contract year that you talk about with a lot of guys? That this is, you get to that year and this is the go time type deal, and it hits them. I mean, we've seen that through the years, right?
I mean, certainly, I think that's possible. I mean, again, I think there were a lot of people that thought, Kamal could not graduate till after spring, so he could not have left in the wintertime. But there were a lot of people that thought he might not be back after spring. And then, after spring, everybody said, man, he had such a great spring, and had his head on straight and stuff. And I'm like, well, it was spring. I mean, it's like the turkey that goes out in the middle of the field when it's not turkey season. It's easy to walk out there when you're not going to get shot. I mean, what's he like in fall camp? If he's that same guy, and that's why I'm taking a flyer stock on. If he's that same guy, Kamal Hadden is as talented as anybody in that secondary. Again, though, he kind of gets in his own way at times. But he's not a bad kid. He's a nice kid. I root for that kid. I don't think he's had the greatest, the greatest resources around him his entire life. And, I kind of root for that kid to succeed. So I hope he's having the same fall camp as he had in spring.
Yeah, and Grant, I think you can totally buy the Danico Slaughter stock if you want to, and here's why. That guy was the third team safety for half of the season last year. It was a non-factor other than special teams. Then they bump him over to corner where he plays reluctantly, and he ends up being one of their two best corners. Where does he play heading into this fall is a fascinating conversation that we'll dive into as you get closer to fall camp, because we've talked about how those pieces fit. Where are their best five? Is the best five with him as a corner, which I've said all along, that may or may not be the case when you start looking at this secondary. That'll be a fascinating study in this secondary throughout the summer heading into fall camp. I'm buying stock in Bryson Eason is who I'm buying stock in. I think Bryson Eason is going to put it together, and I'm in the Bryson Eason camp. I think he had moments last year, AP, where he was good, but I don't think he was as consistent as he could be. I think he can, when he puts it together with any kind of consistency. He's older. I think his head's in a better spot. I think Bryson Eason is going to be a guy that few talk about right now, but I think he's going to make more consistent noise from day one with Tennessee this football season. So I'm buying some Bryson Eason stock.
Who was it that you predicted was going to have a good game years ago, and they had a good game, then they didn't do much the rest of the year?
Oh, DeAndre Johnson.
Yeah, DeAndre
Johnson. South Carolina, man. He had 2 sacks. He tore him up. Of course, South Carolina had a quarterback that couldn't move. I mean, he couldn't get out of the pocket at all. And so it was DeAndre Johnson finished his career at Miami, right? Isn't that where he finished?
Correct.
Didn't do anything down there either. So anyway, there's some stock buys, just kind of a fun topic in the middle of May to talk about as this team finishes final exams this week. They go and get about a 10-day break, and then they'll be back on Monday of Memorial Day, or on Memorial Day, and they will reconvene at that point, and will start their full summer workout program. When we come back on the other side here, we're going to have a conversation about some recruiting, get the latest on recruiting. We'll hit a couple of basketball topics as well. That's coming up as you listen to the Volquest.com podcast presented by our good friends at Exterior Home Solutions.
Life happens, and damage to your home can be extremely stressful. That's why it's important to find someone who offers efficient, quality work with financing options. Exterior Home Solutions, they value not only family, but community. And they're who I call when life happens, and you should too.
All right, Austin Price, let's talk some recruiting here as the evaluations of May continue to roll on and we get ready to start welcoming a bunch of guys to campus for official visits. They've got the big Memorial Day weekend bash, or what I don't know what we're calling it. It's just going to be a bunch of recruits in that weekend, AP.
That's
so
right.
Let's talk a little recruiting. Where are you at with stuff right now?
Well, I think Tennessee is in a good spot as we enter the middle part of May. And, I still think there can be some noise this month. We'll see. And then after that, I think, a lot of these official visits will happen in June. I think you might see 1-2 guys pull the trigger in June. I think most people are going to see them in July because you're going to get through the official visits in June. And if you don't pull the trigger that last week of June, then July will be your target date, much like it was a year ago across all the recruiting landscape. Is July is going to be that trigger month. And so, again, I think Tennessee's trying to figure out what they want at linebacker. You saw Bodie Cahoon come off the board, as I said on the board on Monday. Bodie Cahoon was somewhere between 4 and 6 on the pecking order. Tennessee's not willing to take any linebackers at this time. Bodie Cahoon did not want to wait and potentially, not have a spot here and lose a spot at Notre Dame. And so there was no point to take official visits. Go ahead and lock in your spot at Notre Dame, and he's comfortable there. Tennessee at linebacker, you look at Edwin Spillman, Sammy Brown, Jordan Burns, Tylen Singleton, Chris Cole. All of those are kind of that to me, like top 5, and not in any particular order. I just named them how I thought of them in my brain. Tennessee's trying to figure out where they're at on the offensive line. They need to add tackles. And what's that look like? Do they get an official visit for Brandon Baker? I think they will. But that's a kid from California. Tennessee's had some success pulling kids out of California over the years. They'll continue to swing out there, especially with Joey Halsley's ties being a California native. Elsewhere, Max Anderson, William Satterwhite, Ethan Callaway, all guys that Tennessee's going to try to land along the offensive line. We'll see if they have any success there at all. At running back, Peyton Lewis continues to have a lot of momentum with Tennessee. Does he take his official visits in June? We'll see. And I still think Braylon Russell is going to factor here. I think that when coaches have went out and been able to evaluate him this spring, they have found someone who, yes, is 245 pounds, but moves like a 220-pound back. And that's very intriguing when you can get size with super athleticism.
Who is not the most important? That's not fair. Give me a couple of guys who it's imperative they get them in town for either the last weekend or they get them in town for a visit here to be in. Is it Russell? They got to get him in town.
No, he's coming back. He's going to officially visit in June.
Okay.
If you're looking at just the running back position, Daniel Hill, he's this year's version of Noel Rogers.
Right. We haven't seen
South
him.
Carolina. He's been there quite a bit. For me, it's him. Outside of that, I think, getting, Jaden Riddell in here Memorial Day weekend, getting Jonathan Eccles back. That tight end spot is super important. We've talked about how, Abe has connected with these kids. But again, there's a difference between building a good rapport and relationship with them and actually landing them. And I think, for him, he was always, to me, set up to fail with Jonathan Eccles, and yet to this point has been able to hold on to him, which is a good sign because Eccles was flirting hard this entire time. Then you got Jaden Riddell, down to me, it's Tennessee, Georgia. He's going to officially visit both the month of June. He's going to unofficially be at Georgia this coming weekend and then back to Tennessee for Memorial Day weekend. And then we'll see him I'll see him at the On3 Elite Series NIL event over in Nashville at the end of the month. So, that tight end position is important, but at the same time, again, there's a difference between building a rapport and relationship and then actually getting them in the boat or keeping them in the boat in the case of Jonathan Eccles. So, that's going to be kind of Abe's challenge between now and maybe the first week of August is, you're going to see some of those dominoes fall. If he can land a Riddell, hold on to Eccles, that's a really good sign for him as a recruiter. Not that it's a bad sign if you don't. Again, I think he was set up to fail in a lot of ways just because he wasn't out on the road in January. He's not, hadn't been on the road at all until spring evaluations. And here he is now out there on the road. And then again, connecting well with kids. But, it's a dog-eat-dog world in this SEC.
All right, let me ask all you guys this question. Big picture here. Austin's talking about official visits. We're seeing a lot of official visits in the month of June. A lot of guys are going to make decisions. We will not get into the topic of an early signing period in September 1 or August 1, considering, half the country makes a decision in the summer now. That's a topic for a different day. But there is this, and I don't think it's gotten a ton of play nationally, that kids could take an unlimited number of official visits. There's no longer 5. You can take as many as you want to take. So my question is, do you think kids will be taking 8, 10, 12 official visits? And 1, and 2, if you're a school, Rob Lewis, how do you handle the fact that you're not fighting for one of somebody's 5 visits? You can get a visit. How do you determine how much do you have to put into the fact of, hey, do we want to wait? It's not because they still have a number. Do you waste a visit on a kid? Because any kid can come visit you now. You're not fighting for one of the five.
Yeah, I don't think we'll see a ton of kids take 10 or 12 visits. I mean, there'll be a few. There'll always be exceptions. I mean, you guys know. I mean, a lot of these guys, when they're freshmen or sophomores, can't wait, to get recruited. Can't wait to start, getting noticed and have to get the phone calls and texts from coaches. And then by the time, a year and a half later, they're done with it. So I don't think you'll see a lot of guys that get to double digits. But I do think the bigger question is the second thing you mentioned, Brent. How are programs going to judge whether or not to, or are we wasting a visit on this kid? Do we want to be one of 8 instead of, one of 3 places that he's checking out? And at places like Tennessee, where budget is not a concern, I think you probably have a more liberal stance on that. But there's going to be some programs where, the budget does factor in. Are you wasting the visit? I don't know that many of those programs are in the SEC, but out there in college basketball, out there in college football somewhere, that will be a concern. But I'm always pro athlete, so I'm kind of like it, and it helps kids, especially who maybe commit, coach and change, decommit, and how many official visits do you have left to take if you used 4 of them in the fall to see the school you eventually picked?
Yeah, for me, I think Rob's right. I think you're going to see. It won't be a big percentage of people that take 12 official visits. Now, do I think you end up getting several kids that get 6 or 7? Sure. I mean, because sometimes there is that bleed over. Like, I really like that team, but it's a fringe top 5. Now all of a sudden he can go see option 5B or 5C or whatever you want to look at it as. I think the other thing too is you'll see it a lot with kids that just have kind of crappy home lives, and they can get out for a weekend and go to a school. I think that opens that up quite a bit for kids that are, again, that don't have the best home life.
Grant, coaches think they can get everybody, right? I mean, you get them on campus, you can get them. So where's the coaching balance of, yeah, we don't need it because they only got 56 unless they're rolling some over. And we'll see when the NCAA ruling comes out exactly how many Tennessee has to deal with. They may have to balance it more than some other schools. But where's that balance as a coach of we can get anybody if they come to campus versus, look, let's just be realistic here. This is a trip just to take a trip.
Realistic is the key word, I think. I think priority is the key word on both sides. I think you better know who you're prioritizing, and I think you better know who's prioritizing you and not wasting your time and not just getting to your campus just to get out of town and take a visit. I agree with Rob and AP that, there will be more kids that take more than 5, but 10 to 12 sounds tiring to me and almost a little bit overkill in terms of visits and almost paralysis by analysis unless you just want to be traveling, unless you just want to be out on the road. I think it does help kids to get those few more than 5. I don't know what the number is, 6, 7, 8, something like that. But I think from the school side of it, with, their visits are unlimited, your visits are still limited. You better know who you're prioritizing. You better know who's prioritizing you, and you better be realistic in who you think you can get and not take a ton of chances on completely, out of left field. You better not be naive in this process and know who you have a realistic shot with before you bring them on campus.
Yeah, I think it's going to be an interesting debate for sure as to see how that plays. Again, I don't think this topic has generated a ton of buzz, which tells me there's not a lot of people kind of freaking out about it. You know what I mean? Schools aren't necessarily going bananas over it, and I don't think kids have talked about it. I don't know that there's a kid who's got 6 scheduled right now. So I don't know that it's going to be that big of a deal ultimately when it's all said and done, because you got a calendar thing that you got to deal with too. I mean, these kids got to go through their high school senior seasons. It's hard to leave on a Friday night or a Saturday morning, get somewhere and see some teams play. There's only so many weekends in the month of June that are available for you. So from a calendar standpoint, it's not necessarily the easiest thing to do more than 5 visits when it's all said and done. But I do think the idea of having the ability to go see some places during the fall, if there's a coaching change or something's going on at a place that you thought you were heading to, it's not necessarily a bad thing, particularly when you're using so many visits on the front end. Rob, Austin, before we wrap up recruiting and ask these guys a couple of hoops questions here, what's the latest on the Okoye kid from England who's a part of the NFL whatever that thing's called over there.
NFL Academy. Yeah,
Yeah.
he is going to announce coming up tomorrow. Down to Tennessee, Texas Tech, and USC again. I give it the old Hubs 50 here at this point, and he's an athlete, man. I mean, if you go in, he's got a huge wingspan. He's tall, he's lean, and again, a kid that has continued to have a lot of good dialogue with the Vols.
And wherever he commits, he's coming in 2 weeks, right? 3
That's
weeks.
correct. He'll be here in June. He's now a 2023
guy who would be a project at this point, right? I mean, no one should expect major contributions wherever he goes.
Yeah.
Just based on the rawness of him and development time that's going to need. Plus, he wasn't here for spring ball.
If he gives you anything, that's a bonus.
I got you. Okay, so there's the latest on
this year. Is what I'm saying.
Yeah, there's the latest on Emmanuel. Is it pronounced just like the Nigerian Nightmare? His last name?
That's right, baby. Emmanuel Okoye.
Okoye. All right, so there you go. That's the latest on him. He's going to do something here coming up on Wednesday. All right, one quick hoops question for you guys. A couple quick hoops questions. Any surprise to you that Phillips officially went into the portal? Is that just a cover your bases deal now that Tennessee's roster is set? I don't think it surprised anybody at Tennessee, Rob, that he's not going to be back. But were you surprised by the portal news in any way?
Not really. Just like you say, cover your bases. I think, Grant and I both, talked or written that Julian's plan or, goal is to be playing professionally next year. And I think the portal was just, keep that option open, in case the draft isn't anything like what you hope it's going to be, and all you leave the NIL option out there on the table for yourself. But Tennessee is not expecting him back for a while, and Grant can reiterate that, I'm sure.
Yeah, I think Rob's absolutely correct that he wants to play pro basketball next year, and this is just a thing where the portal closed on May 11th, and he got his name in there on May 10th to have that backup option in case this process goes terribly. He doesn't get the feedback he wants, whatever. He doesn't think he's going to go where he wants to go. Now, if Tennessee, I don't know that he's not a guy that Tennessee wouldn't have saved a spot for if there had been dialogue from the start that, yeah, I might come back to school and I might want to go back to Tennessee, but I'm not sure that was the case. So not a ton of surprise. Nobody expected him back at Tennessee. Like Rob said, when you're filling up the scholarship limit, when you're going to 14 like they did for a couple of weeks, you're not expecting any of these guys to get back in a Tennessee uniform. So not a ton of surprise.
Big picture, if you're a guy looking to go pro, but you haven't hired an agent, should you go in the portal just to cover your bases because you don't know what the school you're at's going to do? I mean, is that the safe play to make, is to go ahead and be in the portal? I'm not talking just about Julian Phillips. I'm talking in general with the rule that the NBA has says that if you don't hire an agent, you can pull your name out of the draft, but that's after the portal window closes. So should you go in the portal just to cover your bases, to have as many options as you want to possibly have? Because the team you're playing for is looking at their options moving forward, right? So is it the safe play to do what he's doing?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I think you'll probably see a lot of people, do it going forward because as you just mentioned, the key for a lot of those kids or the big factor is, because teams have to protect themselves. I mean, they can't, wait and say, okay, take all the time you need when, transfer portal season is vitally important to how you're going to construct your roster for next year. So, as much as they might have, wanted to keep the option open for Julian, it just didn't make sense. And, like Grant said, that, they were at 14 before Julian had ever come out and said, anything one way or another. And again, Grant mentioned the keyword dialogue. I don't think there's been a lot of dialogue between Tennessee and Julian Phillips since the season ended. And so for the Tennessee standpoint, the writing was on the wall.
Which goes back, Rob, to the thing I asked Rick Barnes about Nashville at the Big Orange Caravan, is the overlap of when you can enter the draft, when you can enter the portal, all that stuff. The timing of it all is just a train wreck for college coaches, in my opinion.
Yeah, because what was it, Grant? The last day to get the portal was May the 11th, and the last day and that's a month before the last day to withdraw from the NBA draft. So
yeah, I think you 100% do it if you're a player because teams and programs are on such a more expedited schedule than you are. They're not waiting around until May. And if your name's not in the portal, you're not giving yourself that option if the feedback doesn't go the way you want it to. And your coaching staff has had to fill up your roster and build something for the next season. And if you can get those guys that you want out of the portal, like Tennessee was able to do in April, you take those guys and you add them and you figure out the rest later. And for Julian Phillips, that's probably, the rest later is you're not going to have a spot at Tennessee. Not that I think he wants a spot at Tennessee, but you need to have your name in that portal in case you don't get the feedback you want and leave yourself options open, because there's a lot of teams that are still looking to fill scholarship spots. Tennessee's not one of those. And if you have your name in that, you're available to a lot of those teams. And I think it could work well for Olivier Conwa too, a guy that could end up overseas. And, Michigan still wants Olivier. They're still actively recruiting him as far as I know. He could leverage, NIL options at Michigan against a contract wherever he ends up playing. So it could work out in a couple different ways for these guys.
Yeah, again, with the calendar, as Austin said, I don't think you can avoid it given the way the NBA playoffs are, where the draft time is. It is a train wreck because you have to, as a coach, you got to make decisions. Who do you really hold a spot for, knowing that you may not get them, because now you're competing with other schools, you're competing with the NBA draft, you're competing with overseas play. Is that something you want to go through to try to get a guy to potentially come back who's certainly doing everything he can not to be back and go advance his career? Or do you move on elsewhere and get a guy who wants to come and be a part of your program? It's a really delicate balance, really hard balance for coaches, but the calendar is not going to get any kind of relief for them anytime soon because the NBA is not changing their draft window. And I don't think that they're going to change the rule that says you can pull your name out of the NBA draft anytime soon either. So that's another coaching challenge there. Last question, then we're out the door. Hendon Hooker was announced this week basically as a redshirt year for the Detroit Lions coming off the ACL. With that being the case, what kind of concerns do you have with Zakai Ziegler and his recovery from the ACL and a timeline for that? Is that any more of a – because to me, when I heard that, I was kind of like, okay, you start adding up months. The assumption that Zakai is going to be ready to go pretty early maybe is not as – and I don't know the severity of Zakai's tear versus Hendon Hooker's tear, but just in general, when you hear that Hooker's going to basically have a redshirt year for the Lions, which they can do because they have a quarterback, but is that a bit of a reality that, hey, this thing for Zakai from a timing standpoint may not be as clean in terms of when he's back as a lot of people want to think that it's going to be at this point?
For me, it's not a concern because everybody I talk to speaks of how well Zakai has handled rehab and how expedited the process has been and how everything's kind of going the way it should and how they feel like he's not really going to miss a ton of time. And, it's May and they're talking about that now. It could be a completely different story in, August, September, October, November, all that stuff. So I don't know. For me, it's less about Hendon Hooker. I spend a stupid amount of time watching Atlanta Braves baseball, and I watched Ronald Acuna come back from an ACL and just not look like himself last year, not have that explosiveness that he needed from that knee. And this year, he looks like a completely different person, back to the guy he was before the injury. So Zakai relies so much on that explosiveness and that quickness. For me, it's not a question of when he gets back or how delayed it is. It's how much does he look like himself from the time he gets back on the floor. How long does it take him to get back to looking like that guy that he was before the injury? Everybody speaks very well about the rehab process and how it's going and how quickly it's going. And they don't think he's going to miss a ton of time. But at the same time, how in a rush are you to bring him back and how long does it take to get back to being his old self?
Yeah, I'm just a wait and see guy because, the Hooker thing doesn't, concern me as much as it just they all – I think all these ACL injuries are created differently. If you want, Hubbard, you mentioned, sometimes the severity of the tear, varies from one player to the next, and it's just a different timetable for everybody. So I want to see how he looks in October, and that would still be really quick, as far as a complete recovery. But I think if he's, if he looks okay in October, if you can see some flashes, then you think maybe as it gets closer to being calendar year, then maybe he has a full chance of being back. But I just think they're all different, and I'll wait and see. But I'm not somebody who thinks it's no big deal and he's going to be full speed in November. Not that at all.
Yeah, well, we'll see. And I think, Grant, you make a good point. Just how quick does he get? Not just about physically being able to be out there, but how comfortable is he, and where is that explosiveness with beyond just being out there? we'll have to wait and see as his rehab continues on Tennessee's campus. That's going to do it for this edition of the Volquest.com podcast, presented by our good friends at Exterior Home Solutions. Be sure and like this. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. And obviously check us out at Volquest.com. We got all the latest in recruiting, baseball, hoops, football, plenty of conversation at the General's Quarters. That's all at Volquest.com. For Grant Ramey, Rob Lewis, and Austin Price, and Brett Hubbs, thanks for joining us. Have a great rest of your Tuesday, everybody.